Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest, very happy to have him. He is a Canadian lawyer and he's been a disability advocate for many, many years. He now is the chair of the AODA Alliance and brings a wealth of knowledge here to us. He's received the Order of Canada, the Order of Ontario. He's been named the 25 top 25 most influential lawyers from Canadian Lawyer Magazine, and a lot here that we're really excited to talk to him about. So thank you so much, David, for joining us here and looking forward to chatting with you about your career.
Great to be here.
And David, maybe you can start for anyone, maybe of my students who may not have heard of you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what brought you into law and some of the highlights of the different things you've been involved with over your long career.
Well, what brought me to law is I always loved to argue, and I actually found a career where someone would actually pay me to argue with other people, and I thought that was like, what could be better? I love the analytical part of the job. I love the getting up in court or before a tribunal and making the best argument I can. I love being grilled by judges with tough questions. I like really effective opponents who can make the contrary argument totally effectively and catch me on anything that might be weak in what I'm arguing. It's both people intensive and intellectually rigorous. I loved all of that.
And certainly over the years there, we're talking about advocacy. Can you maybe share some of in terms of the different things that you did? You were at the Ministry of the Attorney General's office. Some of the different challenges that you faced in the profession, and anything that you could share for students who are thinking about going into law. Some of the things that maybe that they can look forward to.
Well, I really held 3 jobs with the provincial government over a period of 33 years. For the first 5 years, I worked in an office called the Crown Law Office Civil. They are the civil litigation office for the Ontario government. Think of the Ontario government as like the biggest client in the province, and they get sued or they sue people a lot, and they have a law firm within them that does all the cases for them. So it was you got to see a wide range of different and very interesting cases. I then spent 5 years in the constitutional law branch arguing constitutional cases, mainly Charter of Rights cases. So somebody would go to court and say the government violated the Charter of Rights. We were on tap to argue the government side of the case. And then for the last 23 years of my career, I made a complete change. I switched from civil law to criminal law. I was on the prosecution side. I didn't do trials, basically. I did appeals. So I was in an office called the Crown Law Office Criminal. They represent the Crown on most criminal appeals in the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court of Canada. So someone gets charged with a serious offense. The case goes to trial. They're convicted and sentenced. They appeal either the conviction, the sentence, or both, or they get acquitted. And the Crown says, or they get a sentence, and the Crown says either they shouldn't have been acquitted, they should have been convicted, or they should have gotten a tougher sentence. The office I was with was made up of lawyers who argued those cases. So it was typically very serious crime and really interesting, complicated issues. Challenges I faced, it's a great career, but it's if you're looking for a career where you turn your brain off, it's not good for you, because you're always facing new and interesting issues. There's always new legal issues. When I started my career, there was no such thing as cell phones or the internet or social media, and now there are huge legal issues to do with cell phones and the internet and social media. Just as an example, there are tons of issues that are very interesting. I always like cases that had interesting people impact and interesting legal issues, I think is the best way to put it. And if you get both of those at the same time and a really good opponent and a very and a good judge who was all well prepared and can ask you lots of tough questions. That was the best. So what is it challenging? By definition, that makes it tough, but that's what I like.
And maybe you can share a bit about what you're doing now, kind of after all that. You're the
Well,
chair of the
okay, I
ADA.
retired almost 6 years ago, and I got a part-time teaching job at two different law schools. I teach a course at U of T, Faculty of Law, on the freedom of expression, one of the rights in the Charter of Rights. And at Osgoode Hall, I'm called a visiting professor of disability rights and legal education. I give a series of guest lectures in different courses: criminal law, family law, constitutional law, all sorts of evidence, in a diverse range of subjects, often but not exclusively on how the law impacts on people with disabilities. I myself am totally blind, and I've been doing disability rights advocacy for a long time, so that really interests me. I also, the other thing I'm spending most of my time on is doing my community organizing and disability rights advocacy. I lead a coalition that seeks to get the government to implement a law, a very important law, a law that I led the campaign to get enacted, called the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And my coalition is involved in interests of people with all kinds of disabilities, whether you're blind like I am, or you're deaf, or you have autism, or you use a wheelchair, or you have a learning disability, or a mental health condition, or an intellectual disability, whatever it may be. We do advocacy. We do it at the provincial and the federal level. So in the most recent federal election, we were trying to get election commitments from the federal parties on what they would do for us. In the province, just as we're speaking today, I've been in the media just this morning talking about what's needed to ensure that the new vaccine passport that Ontario is about to create is accessible to people with disabilities and doesn't discriminate against people with disabilities. So there's an endless list of important and interesting issues. What do we need to do to ensure that students with disabilities in school or college or university can fully participate? What do we need to do in our healthcare system to ensure that patients with disabilities don't face discriminatory barriers when they want to take part, benefit from healthcare services, something that's especially important during this pandemic. So those are a couple of the main things I've been involved in.
So let's start with what you were talking about this morning there in the media. What can be done, or let's talk about the vaccine passports there, and if they are discriminatory, and is there anything that can be done? I mean, I know it's not officially rolled out with all of the fine tuning there on the, I think it's like a QR code on an app, but is there anything that can be done there to kind of minimize that?
There's specific. It is quite possible for the government to ensure, to do its job and to ensure that the new vaccine passport does not create any new barriers against people with disabilities. But they got to plan to do it. They got to decide it's a priority. They got to put some effort into it. And the current provincial government, unfortunately, has a really bad track record when it comes to that. For example, the passport is principally to be available through a smartphone app. Well, there are seniors and people with disabilities who either don't own a smartphone because they disproportionately are poor, or they don't have cell data plans, or if they have a phone, they may not know how to use all of the features. So that's the first problem. Or if they're told, well, by the government, as the government said, well, then you can just go to the website on a computer and print up a passport. Well, that's great if you own a computer, know how to use it, if the website's accessible and so on, and you've got an internet plan. And there are people who don't. Disproportionately poor people, seniors, homeless people. It's like a serious issue. So that's the first problem. The second thing is an app needs to be designed to be accessible. What do I mean by that? So I have an iPhone here in my hand. I'm going to hold it up, and it talks. If I press buttons, I flick my hands, And that's not Siri talking. It's called VoiceOver. It reads what's on the screen. And if an app is designed to work with VoiceOver, if the buttons are properly labeled and so on, I can use it. And I use my iPhone all the time. I have a gazillion apps on my phone. But there are any number of apps out there which aren't designed to be accessible. For example, the federal government released this new ArriveCan app for people coming into Canada during the pandemic for processing your documentation about whether you're vaccinated and so on. It's not accessible. They did not design it properly. And we're worried that the Doug Ford government may make the same mistakes. Why? Because they've got a really bad track record on accessibility. They say a lot of lovely things, but their record of actually doing things is really poor and is treating it as a very low priority or not really seeming to care very much about it. We're nonpartisan. We don't support or oppose any government. The Trudeau government, it's a different political party, messed up the ArriveCan app. So we've had problems with different parties. So those are just a couple of examples.
Now, I mean, in terms of things like this, and maybe let's go back to just the legislation there, the AODA, in terms of
Sure.
benchmarks to reach for 2025, and maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of the history there in terms of your advocacy and getting there. And how are we doing? I mean, I know it's kind of a very general question, but how are we doing? I mean, obviously there's been government changes, every couple of years, in terms of progressing towards some of those, and where are the areas that we definitely need to really pick up the pace over the next 3.5 years?
Well, I'm going to give you a quick answer, but if those of you folks out there in the Ether audience want to learn more about this, let me just give a bit of a plug. If this interests you, if you have a disability, or people around you have disabilities, your family members or friends or spouses or whatever, or if you just want to learn more about this, let me give you a couple of ideas. Our website is www.aodaalliance.org, aodaalliance.org. And while I'm talking, you can go to that website, and right on the homepage, there's a sign up link. And if you plug in your email address and sign up, you can get email updates from us on what's new and answers to the questions like what you just said, and tips on how to get involved. The other thing is I'm really active on Twitter, and my coalition is. So follow me on Twitter. It's at David Lepofsky, DavidLepofsky. Go on Twitter right now while you're listening to us. You can do it while you're watching. And follow me at David Lepofsky. And retweet our tweets. We were tweeting to candidates and parties over the past several weeks during the election. We're tweeting about the passport. We tweet. You can follow and learn a lot more about this. What is the AODA? The AODA is legislation that we campaigned for a decade, from 94 to 2005. And it requires the provincial government to lead Ontario to become accessible to people with disabilities by 2025. And it details how that has to be done. How are we doing? Well, since it was passed, I'd say we've made some progress on accessibility, and people are more alert to the need to take action, and there's more action that has been taken, but we are not making the progress we deserve. So we have found that too often there are new buildings, new laws, new programs, new educational programs, new technology, new websites, and so on that are being created with accessibility barriers, even though the legislation is designed so that won't happen. And we're not on schedule for full accessibility by 2025. It's only 3.25 years from now. We're not even close. And that's due to poor successive governmental leadership, not just one particular premier or minister, but a series of folks who just dropped the ball. And you don't have to take my word for it, though I hope you would, or those of other people with disabilities, though I think you should. The government under the legislation is required every few years to appoint an independent review to look into how well we're doing on accessibility, sort of take our collective temperature. The government appoints the person doing the review. Well, they person who did the last review, it came out 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, is a guy named David Onley. David has a disability, but he's also the former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And he held hearings and talked to people out there. And his report concluded that not only are we behind on accessibility, but that we have a province that is, his words, full of soul-crushing barriers facing people with disabilities, and that we're not even close. So that's what an independent government-appointed review concluded 2 years ago. And we've seen virtually no government action to speed up progress since it received that report. In fact, if you follow me on Twitter, we've been running a daily counter, how many days it's been since the government got that report, and yet it has no comprehensive plan to implement it.
Now, I mean, with that, I mean, are there any sort of teeth there in terms of legislation, in terms of benchmarks they have to receive, penalties for organizations, things
well,
like
the
that?
problem is the government's supposed to be doing that. It's supposed to be setting the rules, making accessibility standards, and it's supposed to be enforcing the law. But on both fronts, it's I'm not saying it's doing nothing, but it's doing nowhere near what it needs to be doing. In fact, if you sign up for our update, what you're going to find out is an announcement I'm going to issue tomorrow, is that on Monday morning, this upcoming week, this Monday morning, September 27th at 10 a.m., I'm actually going to be in court in a case against the minister responsible for accessibility in the Ontario government. The case is called David Lepofsky versus Raymond Cho. And I'm going to be arguing the case myself because I'm trained as a lawyer. I know how to do it. I've got a wonderful pro bono lawyer helping me put it all together. And we're going to be arguing that the government has been deficient in complying with its obligations under the AODA, contrary to the act. I picked one illustration of this that I'm going to be arguing in court. So if you want to take 2 hours to watch it streamed live, then go to aodaalliance.org right now, sign up for our updates, and tomorrow you're going to get an email with the YouTube link. Back to you.
Well, it's great, I think, and it's great that people can see what's going on. I mean, I think that's one of the things with the changes, obviously, to be virtual, but I mean, that also comes about. I know you have maybe you can talk about your series there that you were sharing with me before, the 6 videos. But I mean, that kind of also leads to, have we looked at when we make a lot of these changes, in light of the pandemic and COVID-19 virtual Zoom kind of courts? I mean, are we also looking for those who have disabilities in those changes, or are they also being forgotten? What can you share about that experience?
Well, I can tell you this: we face barriers, disability barriers in all aspects of life, in public transit, in education, in goods, services, employment, and so on. The courts are no exception. The good news is that there is a committee, and I have the privilege of being a member of it, co-led by a senior judge and a senior public official, called the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee. And we work on trying to come up with strategies and oversee progress to make the courts accessible. One of the things that committee had me do some years ago is to work with the Law Society of Ontario to create a series of 6 webinars for lawyers and paralegals on practical tips for how you can help individual clients with disabilities overcome barriers in the court process. Whether there's a panel on what you can do when people are blind, or if people are deaf, or people have an intellectual disability or learning disability, or autism. We have panels on a whole series of different disabilities. And those videos are now available to the public. I sent you the link. You can make it available to everybody. And it's on YouTube. It's captioned. But also, if you go to YouTube and you just search on David Lepofsky and accessibility or disabilities, you're going to see we have a number of videos out on a wide range of topics. For example, you mentioned COVID. I've given a couple of lectures at Osgood that are now up online about the barriers people with disabilities faced during COVID. Barriers in schools, barriers in the healthcare system, and detailing what needs to be done to address it and why all of this violates the law to have all these barriers. So there's a lot of resources. Whether you go to aodaalliance.org, you're going to see we have a page on COVID with a bunch of links. We've got a page on education with a lot of links. We got a page on court accessibility with a lot of links. employment, and so on. There's tons. There's a whole page on enforcement. You can see what we've done to try to get this law enforced. There's a Canada page. We'll let you know what's going on in the federal sphere. You can see what the federal parties were asked in the last provincial election, the last federal election, and what we got and what we think the results of it all mean for us. Again, we don't try to elect or oppose any party. We try to get the commitments from everybody. But we, if you go to the website, you can see all of those kind of resources for you. And the other thing is, if you go to YouTube, you can see there's all sorts of resources. Again, if you look up AODA Alliance or David Lepofsky, you'll see all sorts of content and lots more coming. You've gone silent. I hope I haven't dropped out.
Sorry about that.
I'm still in. I'm still in. We're good. I can hear you.
It's just I think I'm having some technical issues here, but perhaps maybe you can share. I mean, certainly going through law school and getting into the profession, and you talked about working with the Law Society. For those who may have various disabilities, what in terms of ensuring, in terms of access to the profession and getting the supports that are there. I mean, can you share from all your experience there? What are we doing now here in 2021 that maybe we weren't doing back in the 1980s? And what more can we be doing?
Let me tell you this. If you watching this are a student, either a law student or want to be a law student, or a paralegal student, you want to be a paralegal student, and you have a disability now, or you get one later, there's a duty to accommodate people with disabilities. It's a really important part of our law. In fact, I'm going to be recording a video about it in the next week, so it'll be going up online. But the fact is that we've got two things now in the year 2021 that we did not have way back when I was a law student in 1976 to 1979. And the first thing that we've got is we have a whole lot of new technology. So that when I was in law school as a totally blind person, if a book wasn't already recorded on tape, like a law book or a case book for school, I had to get it recorded on tape, which meant either recruiting volunteers or going to the CNIB and getting them to record it. That was a lot of work. And if otherwise, you would have to take handouts or additional reading for a paper or whatever and get volunteers to read to you. And that really meant there was a really finite amount of reading material I could get through in a period of time, because I'd have to get people recording them. The other thing, though, is that so now there's been a huge revolution in technology. Having document scanners, getting stuff online that my computer can read aloud. If it's in Word, MS Word text format, I can read it. PDFs, on the other hand, are a real problem. I wish to heck they would just go away. Pardon me. Or that if people post things in PDF, if they just post it in Word or HTML at the same time, we'd be fine. But in any event, there is tons of information available to me. And I mean, I even have a free app on my phone. If somebody hands me a piece of paper, I can take a picture of my phone. My iPhone will read it to me. So, I mean, this is something that, 40, 50 years ago, even 35 years ago, was not even imaginable, much less that I'd have it on my hip and that it would be free. So that the capacity to take part is enormously improved. But on the other, and the other thing that we've got is that because of the laws that, we didn't have equality rights for people with disabilities in the mid-70s. These laws weren't enacted. The Human Rights Code wasn't amended to include disability till 82. The Charter of Rights wasn't passed with a disability equality guarantee that we had to fight for until 1982. Well, those have now been on the books for almost 40 years. And it's had a chance to percolate its way into our legal system and to our broader system, so that there's, I would say, a greater facility in place to turn those into action. Does that mean nobody faces barriers if you have a disability and you want to practice or you want to go into legal education? No, there still could be barriers, but it's easier to take them on than it ever was way back then. And there's more tools available to enable you to take them on, which I think is a really positive sign. Back to you.
And I don't know if you can still hear me here. It looks
Yeah,
kind
I
of
can. Yeah, you're good.
okay,
You're
perfect.
good.
So yeah, so I mean, for those who can be better allies, that don't necessarily face the disabilities, and we don't necessarily know sometimes of, we take things for granted. Obviously, what can we be doing to be better in terms of? I know you were talking about those videos there where you have the clients, but what can we do to sort of further bring about accommodations? And so I mean, obviously we have a legal requirement there, but what more can we be doing, whether in schools or in the profession, to ensure that things are not kind of falling through the cracks as
Well,
you've been talking about?
there's several things. I mean, the short answer is sign up for our updates at aodaalliance.org or follow at David Lepofsky on Twitter. We also, by the way, have a Facebook page, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. But one way or the other, we're way more than I can cram into a podcast today. We will be, we provide tons of answers to that. But in brief, within the profession, if you are a lawyer or paralegal and you have colleagues who have disabilities or clients with disabilities, the 6 videos I told you about give you tons of practical tips on what you can be doing to assist. And beyond that, that's beyond that, being ready to take a pro bono case to help somebody take on a major barrier is always a really important thing to do. Some of you, I'm not sure how much of our audience is in Toronto, but wherever you are in Ontario, if you get on a bus or a streetcar, or in Toronto, if you get on the subway, you'll hear you're supposed to hear each stop audibly announced on each vehicle. That was not the case in the early 1990s. Most didn't do it at all, or didn't do it enough. I had to file not 1, but 2 human rights cases against the Toronto Transit Commission. The first one to force them to announce subway stops, the second one to force them to announce bus and streetcar stops. I won both cases, but I was ably assisted by pro bono lawyers who volunteered their time and their support to help bring these cases. Because you're taking on some big government agency like the TTC, they'll throw lawyers at you and throw every barrier in your path they can. So it is a real battle to bring these things. And when lawyers or paralegals are prepared to work on pro bono basis to help people bring these kind of issues forward, that's enormously important. Now, I'm fortunate, I'm a lawyer myself, so I have pro bono counsel to help me, but I know how to do this. If I wasn't a lawyer, I'd need their help even more. That would be really, really, would have been even tougher. So that's just another way that people can contribute.
And perhaps maybe you could tell us a bit about going through the Human Rights Tribunal there, and what the process is like, and if people who want to help in terms of doing things pro bono, how are they able to kind of maybe walk through what the process is like, or even you could talk about your case there on Monday, kind of how everything comes together, so we have an idea of kind of the
Well,
law that goes behind
that is a huge question. Let me just give you a couple of pieces of it. First, if you want to get involved in pro bono activity, Pro Bono Canada, Pro Bono Ontario are fabulous places to volunteer your time and to get connected with lawyers who are prepared to do pro bono work and who would benefit from your assistance. So that's the best way to get plugged in at the start. Or if you're at in a legal education program, look for and ask about programs there where you can start doing pro bono work, whether you're volunteering in a legal aid clinic or whatever it may be. So there's ample opportunities to plug in. Now, the actual process of putting a case together, if it's a test case, is I'm just going to give you, I give entire multi-hour training on this, so I'm just going to give you a couple of headlines. The first big issue is picking the right case to bring. And it requires having a sense of, like the TTC case had the advantage as a case for me to, sorry about this, for me to bring that it was a barrier that I thought was self-evident. I mean, blind people need to know what stop we're at. It seemed like they had no defense. Like every bus has a driver, every driver has a mouth, and hopefully they know what stop we're at. And it could affect a lot of people. And I decided to bring that forward as a basis, and it was frankly not something that would cost them anything if they. Now they decided to put into place automated stop announcements, with fancy technology. But I said, I'm not asking you to spend money on all that hardware. You can just tell the driver who's there anyway to say next stop is, and that could make a huge difference. Now, picking the right cases is very important because bad cases, bad facts make bad law. And so I picked a case that was really solid, and the TTC fought me. They didn't just settle. They fought me. We had to go to a hearing. So then you're involved in all the work of preparing, choosing your witnesses, preparing your evidence. In this case, you're entitled to ask for disclosure from the TTC. We got tons of documents from them, and that meant reading all of those and figuring out what's relevant, and planning cross-examination of the TTC witness. Because if they get in the witness stand and say, well, we can't do any better, you want to prove they can. If I could just give you an example, I'm going to give you one example where it makes a difference. So in Toronto, after I raised this issue, the TTC said they would tell their subway crews to announce all stops, not using technology, just picking up the microphone. But they found their riders just weren't, or their crews were not doing it reliably. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. You could never tell when you got on a train whether you get announcements or not. So I asked them, I cross-examined the head of the subway operations at the time. And one of the things I said is, look, if you, and they had said, well, there's nothing more we can do. I said, well, if you told the crew, you could have told your crew to announce it twice. When you're leaving the prior stop, you could say, next stop is Main Street. And then when you're entering the Main Street station, again, say, arriving at Main Street. And if they know they got to do it twice, at least if they do it once, it's better than nothing. And the guy said, that's true. And I said, well, did you ever direct them to announce it twice for each station? No, we never did. Well, the adjudicator listened, and part of his order was to order them that they will announce each stop twice. And that's why when you ride the subway in Toronto, you hear next stop, Main Street. And then a minute or two later, it says arriving at Main Street. This is also good for blind people because when I'm at the stop before the one I'm getting off, I want to note it's time to get up and to get in position to get off. But it's an example where reading their documents gave me the idea. I knew what they hadn't instructed them, and then being able to cross-examine them on it, and then there's a practical outcome. But that comes from a lot of work doing the reading and doing the preparing and the thinking it through.
And were you surprised, or I mean, even in other matters that that you're facing, sort of? I mean, is it part of the nature of law in legal practices that you're seeing it go to a hearing rather than something that could be resolved with significant?
Nothing surprises me. On the one hand, I'm sitting here with an iPhone on my hip that has some of the most cutting edge technology to make it accessible. Because the Apple Corporation decided, what the heck, we just want all our products to be accessible. I'm talking to you on a computer using Windows, which is not a Mac, where Microsoft was way further behind at this and is still playing catch up. I'm used to some examples where they do great and some examples where they put up a ridiculous fight. But that's the nature of doing social justice advocacy. You don't get into it because it's easy.
And what maybe you can share about those who are looking to get into it or are in it, and they're facing a lot of that pushback. And again, we talked at the very beginning about challenges, how to overcome some of that resistance and to push through?
Well, okay, there's two things you got to deal with. How do you deal with the resistors, and how do you deal with yourself? Um, the how do you deal with resistors is all about how to do good, effective litigation. That's what you learn both in your legal education and in practice. Um, how do you deal with yourself? I've had people say to me, I had students say, "Don't you get frustrated? Don't you get discouraged? Don't you feel like it's hopeless?" And And I understand the question, but I say to them, it's like asking a swimmer, if you jump in, are you upset that you have to get wet? And I don't mean that glibly the way it sounds. The fact is, you do social justice advocacy. The reason there are injustices is because these things are deeply entrenched. And it does take a lot of work. On the other hand, I have found over and over that there can be a lot of room for progress. In 1994, when 20 of us met in a meeting room at the Queen's Park at the Ontario Legislature to come up with, to start building a coalition act for it to win the enactment of a Disabilities Act, there was only 20 of us. We're tiny. We were inconsequential. And it did not look, and what we were trying to accomplish looked completely unrealistic. But we organized and persuaded one member at a time in the legislature, one party at a time, one journalist at a time. And, 10 years later, we won the legislation, and we won it unanimously.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a big accomplishment there. And as you said, there's still a lot more to go there, and especially because of the barriers there for 2025 seem way behind here in terms of trying to make those thresholds. So in terms of maybe you can talk about, no, certainly we're talking about the things that are in the immediate future, but what are some of the more medium to long-term goals there that the Alliance is working on? And again,
Well,
obviously,
now that we, I'll tell you, federally and provincially, federally with the election over, we've got one party, the NDP, that did promise to support certain reforms that we want to the national equivalent of the AODA, the Accessible Canada Act. And there's a minority parliament, and they hold the balance of power. So we're going to try to get them to do in parliament what they promised to us during the campaign. So that's one front. Provincially, we are going to continue pushing on accessibility issues, especially in the pandemic. But we also have a provincial election next spring. Now, as with the federal election, we don't try to get any particular party elected or defeated, but we will be coming up with the agenda of what we want all the parties to commit to in the election. And we're going to start campaigning for that earlier than we ever have before. And for more information on it, I sound like a broken record because I am a broken record. Follow at David Lepofsky and sign up to get email updates by going to aodaalliance.org.
Yeah, there's plenty of information on there, and you can obviously sign up, especially for those of you interested in watching on Monday. I think you probably have to do it today or early tomorrow to get the information for Monday. Yeah. And definitely would recommend that. There's just
and by the way, it's not they don't archive these things ordinarily, these court arguments. It's you either watch it or it's gone. So if you want to watch it 10 o'clock Monday morning.
Perfect. And I'm just having some issues here seeing there. I think there was a question here from one of the students who were asking, in terms of the different things you've done, how do you find the experience teaching versus practicing law?
Oh man, listen, I love being in a courtroom. That's what I always love doing. And I miss it. I don't miss the preparation, but I miss the courtroom. But I love the classroom. I love students. They're always interesting. They always have new, challenging perspectives and great questions, and they get you thinking about new and different things. And I've had a number of students that come to me at Osgoode to volunteer to do work with my coalition who say, I came to law school to do disability rights, and I'm totally elated because when I went to law school, there was no such thing as disability rights. There were no courses on it. There was no one teaching it. It wasn't part of the agenda at all. Now there are people who want to. So I find that really quite encouraging. And the other thing about law school is teaching law, which is kind of cool, is when you start out, you meet up one cohort of students and you start doing a bunch of work with them. And 3-4 years later, they're the lawyers out there, right? They're out in practice and they're doing their thing, and you get to watch them, their careers develop. And I have a number of former students of mine who are now judges, and which is really quite cool.
Perfect. So, David, thank you so much for taking the time here and joining us, sharing all that information. And again, we'll give you one last chance there to again further remind everyone listening of where they can get all the additional resources, especially the videos there that you were talking about from the Law Society. And if you have any final words of wisdom for anyone listening, especially the students here about again getting into the field.
I'm going to tell you this. For one thing, I have found that the volunteer, I had a great career in terms of the job I did. Intellectually challenging, professionally satisfying, great colleagues, good work. But I also have found that my volunteer work outside of my job is by far the most rewarding. Doing my volunteer activity is the best. And I love every minute of it. I love taking my skills and devoting it to causes where people couldn't afford to pay for it. Now, I'm not representing individual clients, and don't contact me to get legal advice because I'm not in private practice and I can't advise. I'm not insured. But there are lots of ways you can get involved. You can get involved formally by doing work with a legal clinic or other organizations, pardon me, or you can get on the board of any number of community organizations, volunteer community organizations, and offer your skills there. But either which way, give it a try. It's a lot of fun.
Perfect. So thanks again for joining us. I wish you all the best with your matter there and all the work you're doing with the AODA Alliance. And once again, everyone can go to adoaalliance.org or follow David Lepofsky there at David Lepofsky on Twitter, and they get far more information than we can cram in here in 45 minutes or so. So I would suggest following up on all of those things. And once again, thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone for tuning in.
All right, take care, stay safe.